So this panel is about what happens in the real world, and we hope it'll provide you with some actionable advice you can take back to your own desk. How do you manage sustained dialogue across multiple channels? How do you staff for it? When do you act and when do you sit back and just listen? How do you convince executives that the opportunity outweighs the risk? How do you prove that? And what do you do when it all goes to hell?
So I think there are lots of different ways that companies can become media companies, and you don't always have to create the content yourself. All the people in your ecosystem can do it too.
I think in our call in preparation for this panel, Karen used the term surfacing, and a lot of times your content is actually surfacing somebody else's content.
Yeah, that's right. Either things that are what I call not hard news, right? I mean, Google issues news a lot. But in addition, there's a lot of little-known things, things that users are trying, and you know, I feel like part of our job as communicators is exactly that: to surface more useful information, more things you might not have known, more things where we want your feedback and that sort of thing, that are just not you know, sort of the news of the day.
Well, we do have a good question up here from the tweet stream. Feel free to add yours. Let's get to it. Hey panel, thoughts on the importance of mobile and iPhone content and the role that that plays in everybody being a media company. Charlene, you want to take a whack at that and maybe some best practices?
Yeah, I think it's very important if you're going to be putting out content. But I would say you have to think about not necessarily making all of your content mobile accessible. So if you're, I mean, there are some things like white papers, depending on, people can wait.
What I think is elemental beyond mobile is just media companies thinking about being strategic about making their media atomic. That is, making, you know, slicing off the pieces that could be easily shared in the right format.
And so when does media actually become relevant for somebody? It's those, you have to be appropriately targeting when that content goes on the phone. I see some media companies and some businesses trying to mobilize all of their content, and it's not necessarily appropriate.
I mean, so you raise an interesting point, you know, particularly in a B2B world, right? You know, part of the biggest challenges that I think a lot of companies face is getting executives to really care, right, and understand why this is important. And and I think if we all agree with the basic premise that we now live and work in a world that's increasingly becoming social, it's easier for us to understand that in business, new rules are being written.
So in each of the 4 key traditional brands in my category, I think there are issues or problems that suggest that, you know, in this day and age, you're still not getting it, and they aren't going to get it.
From my perspective, I see that social media has really become, evolved to be a tremendous and very powerful medium to channel emotion, context, and experience.
What's the one lesson that everybody here can take home?
Is to listen, right? And I'll tell you, probably, what helped to refine my viewpoint of what's successful, in order for businesses to be successful in this environment, you have to have aligned to sort of principles of social thinking, right? You have to be open to ideas that are not your own, right? You have to be willing and able to incorporate those ideas into what you do. And I think you have to have a genuine desire to have continuous competitive advantage.
I have to add a PS to the you have to listen,
yeah,
which is you also have to respond quickly. That's really imperative. While all the deliberation about strategy and who, what, where, and crafting a statement and all that stuff, that could maybe still go on, but you have to also respond. Yes, we know we have an outage. We're looking into it. This is one that we've learned.
You know, in certain organizations, there's just no way to totally control it. So it's some acceptance, I think, that has to happen because it's going to get out.
The hardest thing about being a media company is that you develop a lot of scar tissue.
Yeah.
And you take a lot of bumps. And if you are in that cocoon of always controlling content, not putting yourself out, yeah, you won't get hurt. But you won't get the relationships either.
And if you make that conversation interesting and you're really engaged with people, meaning you're orchestrating a conversation, you're not just ignoring it, leaving it alone, that content has incredible value, above and beyond probably the original content that's produced by a professional journalist.
So I think when it gets into content for companies in the B2B world, thought leadership really is kind of a new marketing and communications currency if managed very well.
This notion, the same is true now for a Twitter stream or a blog post or any other way that you're sharing information. You don't have to have a beginning, middle, and end. You're dipping into the stream. You're adding to the conversation. There's back and forth. It's not tablets from on high. And I don't think Google was by any means the worst offender, but I think a lot of companies, thought that traditionally, this is our press release, this is our white paper, we'll hope that people are interested when we put it out there, and that was the end of it.
And it's simply to use Twitter smartly. I mean, I've been able to find the experts in any given field, isolate them, follow them, and benefit from what they're reading, what they're thinking, in real time in a way that just is not possible anywhere else.
And when it comes to something like Twitter, there is this amplifying effect that I think is really interesting. It's sort of self-selecting amplification that the people who want that bit of information, they find it and they forward it. That matters more, I think.
And it's so interesting because the coaching I give to a lot of executives now is, what would you say to a customer? What would you say to somebody if they were standing here right next to you? What would be the conversation you would have? And they are so pressured to be in control. They're so afraid of people coming up behind them and whacking them on the head because of social media, getting the negative comments. They don't have that thick skin and the scar tissue, as I was mentioning before. So any negative comment is a huge blow to their sense of self. So I think that's one of the hardest things about becoming the media company.
If you could give, in a hypothetical example, advice to a CEO who is antisocial, not interested in going there, what 3 pieces of advice would you give that CEO? And then what 1 piece of advice would you give his head or her head of social media and influencer relations?
The 3 things I would tell the CEO is, first of all, you aren't in control, and I would show, and they know it. They know it in their gut, and it's just confirmation. But until they can acknowledge that, they can't move forward. How could social help with that? How can relationships be better? Because you can talk to them, act with them, innovate with them, support them in a better and different way that they want to be supported. And the 3rd thing I would do is go out and show all the different activities that are happening now without them.
If you're authentic, you don't have to be authentic every single time through every piece of communication ever, as long as it's in your soul, right? To the extent businesses have one.
I have a thought.
Yes.
Rather than worrying about being a media company, it seems to me every company needs to have social skills. And I mean that in both senses of the phrase, right? Because if you have social skills, you're able to have a discourse and go back and forth and disagree and make people feel comfortable and, share information.
Being a media company has, again, going back to my core definition, is having an audience, and you create content for them that they believe is authentic.
Because I think one of the biggest challenges that we face right now is getting business executives to really understand what it is. Because I think in many ways, it's getting over that perception of social media based upon its roots in marketing communication, right? A lot of executives I speak to think of, as social being Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, media being journalism, advertising, PR, and they say, not for me, this is for the marketing communications folks. Social media is now, because it's evolved so nicely, it's more than a frontline issue. There's a lot of value that can be derived from this in the core of a business and a business operation. And that's really what we hope to try to really elevate the conversation as to what that means. So business leaders that we depend upon, as professionals to support and engage and participate, really can learn from.
But I would say actually practice being a media company. And what that means is go and find a journalist, go find a journalism student and ask, what does it mean to be, well, maybe not a journalism student, because they're still practicing journalism, not necessarily being a media company. But really identifying who your audience is and thinking about what they want to hear versus what you want to tell them. Big difference. And that's the fundamental difference between being a marketer and a media company, is your perspective and mindset of outward bound versus inward bound.